everybody joining us. I still got a few trickling in, so as those folks join this morning, we'll allow them to come in. Welcome everybody on Thursday, June 17th, 2021. This is another weekly session of BC Ag Today. Topic of discussion this morning is going to be the timber market update. I know a lot of folks have had some questions about the recent timber market. If you've been out to a home improvement store lately and bought a piece of lumber or 2x4, you probably are very well aware that prices have increased pretty substantially over the past several months. And we're pleased to be joined this morning by Neil Clark, our Southeast District Forester and Extension, also A&R Ag agent down in Southampton County. And Neil's going to talk a little bit about the timber market and hopefully answer some questions and give us some explanation as to why lumber prices have increased the way that they have, and maybe answer some questions for landowners that may have timber. Is now a good time to harvest that timber and sell it? And would you expect to get a cut of those profits that's being in the stores right now? So Neil, pleased to have you with us this morning. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started, as always. If you have a question for us, if you could enter that into the chat window, we'll be happy to address those on a case-by-case basis and work through them at the end of Neil's presentation. Also, if you'd like to just save your questions at the end, we'll open it up for question and answers and discussion. So we'll be happy to do that. If you would, please remain muted throughout the presentation just to be respectful to Neil and avoid a lot of background noise. And then we'll open it up there at the end for folks to be able to unmute and ask questions and hopefully facilitate a discussion. So again, thank you everyone for being with us this morning. The recording of the session will be posted as always. So if someone was not able to join us this morning, we'll have this as a educational resource for folks to access after the meeting today. So without further ado, Neil, we appreciate you joining us this morning, and thank you for being here.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm going to try to do a screen share here. Is it okay for me to do that, Stephanie?
Yep.
All right. And am I showing up?
Yep. You look
okay.
good.
Good. Okay. So, yeah, that's the question of the day, right? So if lumber is at historical highs, why isn't my timber is the question. And hopefully we'll answer it. I am Neil Clark. I'm a, as Robbie said earlier, the District Forestry Natural Resources Extension Agent for most things east of 95 in Virginia. I also did some procurement work back on the Northern Neck in my early days in the late 90s, but that was another time and another day. So we'll get started here. And I realize maybe if y'all want to put on the chat where you're from in the state, maybe I can answer some regional things too. My familiarity is a little more in the east, but I'm gonna try to hit on a little bit of things from across the whole state. So the basic thing, and I've listened to some of the other ag market things, and so basic economics, right? This says supply and demand for chocolate bars, but you know, as demand goes up, so does the price, and hopefully the supply will chase that. But sometimes there are supply constraints which cause the demand. When the demand is extreme and the supply is low, then the price goes crazy and increases quite a bit. So the short answer for those who want to go ahead and finish this talk and go about your business, the answer is bottlenecks in short. So where are the bottlenecks in the system that's causing this price to go crazy? So looking at, this is short term, and I hate to show too many charts and graphs, but at the same time, data and numbers speak loudly. So this is basically the pandemic numbers for lumber. So you can see as we go along here, if you go to the left side of your screen, do I don't know if I get a pointer or not down here. It started the pandemic. Things were actually a little slow. Still, there's a lot of uncertainty about what the economy was going to do. And then as folks realized it wasn't going to be just a 2-week break, and the spouses start breaking out the honeydew lists. Then the DIY folks came into gear and started putting another deck on and redoing their landscaping and all that good stuff. So we had a good spike there last summer of 2020. And then things dropped back a bit, market correction, right? Everybody said this is going crazy, and it slumped back down. But then you can see here, March of this year, of course, some of it has to do with the weather, but more of it has to do with now the Fed cranking out a lot of dollars, and people have invested in everything they can think to invest in, right? So at this point in time, lumber and houses are real estate. So I think folks are looking to put their money into something that's real. Let's see. I've gotten off my screen. I'll get it back here in a second. Oh, I want Cortana. Sorry about that technical glitch. Here we go. All right, so then looking back a little bit further, so this is the 10-year, and you can see that lumber is not a very volatile commodity. It stays slow and steady. So this is going back to 2012. You see a slight uptick there between, say, 2018, 2019. The economy started to do pretty good before the pandemic. And then we'll go all the way back to 1980. So, you can see as you're going to zoom out, of course, the troughs and valleys are muted a little bit. However, you see everything's pretty steady until recently here. So this is somewhat of a recent and short-term phenomenon, probably. So I'm putting on here GameStop. This is for those who maybe haven't kept up. This was a company. You see the GameStops in the strip malls and whatnot. That's old-fashioned video games and things that aren't streaming online are not necessarily the most popular. However, back in February, some social media people all kind of collaborated and got together and pumped the price up on this little company to make some volatility. And so, I think I've heard it said before in some of the other market people, folks who look at the market, speculators, they don't care if it goes up or goes down, just as long as it moves. And so I think there's some artificial movement speculation in some of these things that make real supply and demand factors different. So there's a lot of good memes that came out of this. So, when your date says to take her somewhere expensive, you head on down to the local lumber yard, and nice place. And I like this one. 4x8 sheet of plywood, willing to trade for a new diesel pickup truck. This is no low ballers. I know what I have. So we've 2020, of course, and into this year has we've seen a lot of shortages. First there was a toilet paper shortage. Everybody's talk about a real estate, right? And then we had a temporary meat shortage caused by a few different factors, perhaps. Now there's a chlorine shortage, and when your product is only made in one or two factories, you can easily get a glitch in the supply chain. We had the gasoline shortage a few months ago. Thankfully, I say we pulled out of that. There's no shortage of gasoline now, but the price hasn't gone back to where it was. And then ammunition, of course, that's been in a shortage for several years now, and there's some political stuff around. I won't get into politics. And right now, workers, that's the huge shortage that everybody's having. If you tried to get a fast food lately, it's not necessarily fast. And there's a worker shortage, I think, in every industry and for sure in the sawmill industry. So let's look at housing values a little bit. Now, this chart, statistics are funny. You can see, so there's a little bit of month over month. Things are headed back down a little bit. Maybe the price of these homes are getting to folks, and so they're a little bit less. But if you look at year over year, of course, the tricky thing is, so this is in April. You think April 2020, obviously, again, there was uncertainty in the market, and folks weren't necessarily gung-ho at building. So, but all these are up significantly, and obviously home building is up. And I think if you trying to find a home to buy, you'd be hard pressed. There's not so many on the market right now because they've been snapped up, I think. This is some historical data I want to show you. I will show you some more current data later, so don't worry. But this is just to continue to explain the trends. So before I showed you lumber nationwide, this is pulpwood. You see pine up top here and hardwood at the bottom. This is North Carolina data. They don't have Virginia data in this time frame, but it's very, very similar. But you see just kind of a slow and steady increase, thankfully. But again, it's not super volatile. Wood, it'll sit on a stump until you need it, and the mill capacity, doesn't necessarily jump all of a sudden. It gets built, and it's once it's built, it uses the same thing all day, every day. So, and then this is saw timber, a little more volatile maybe than pulpwood. However, still kind of just that slow and steady progression. All right, so here's the whole crux of the matter, though, for our landowners. Some of y'all may be landowners. I'm assuming tuning in. Wood is local. Transportation cost of hauling logs is high because you're hauling water. 50% of that log is water. Once it turns to lumber, it gets a little bit easier to haul longer distances, but and you have some value added there too. But hauling a log, you don't want to do to haul them too far to the mill, or your money is gone. And then the other thing is, when we look at this national data, and I'll be presenting some of that, and you look at even some of these statewide data sources that come in, because people call me all the time, well, what's the market doing? Well, it almost doesn't matter what the market is doing in Alabama or nationwide. It's what is the market doing within 25 miles of your house, and that's really what's going to make dollars and cents for you as a landowner. Now, if you're investing, that's a different story. But if you're investing, worried about whether you should plant trees or not, you need to pay attention to what's going on close to where you are. So, so even if the price is high on these charts, if you're not in the range of one of those mills, you lose. So that's kind of a blunt way to put it, but that's the reality. So here's the other thing. You look at something like wheat, and you can grow wheat for different markets, right? They got the bread wheat and the bacon wheat and different types. Well, trees, you can try to plant the best trees you can for the best product, but you get a little bit of mix of everything on a given acre. So, if you intensively manage, let's say in the eastern part of the state, you intensively manage for pine, you can get mostly pine if you do it right. A lot of the stuff that we've inherited, though, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, is in a mixed condition. In the Piedmont, you get more of the mix, and so if you look at this pricing, hardwood pulp is the lowest thing. There's usually a lot of it on a track, but it's the lowest price thing. Pine pulp you do a little bit better for, again, depending on where you're at, where your markets are. Pine chip and saw is a little bit better, but there's not so many mills in the state. General mixed hardwood saw timber is the next product up. Then you get some oak. When you get oak, you get a little bit better. And then if you have grade oak all the way over here to the right, you get a really good price. Veneer wouldn't even be on this chart, but you don't have a stand of veneer. You have maybe 1 or 2 trees in your property. So you have a mix of products. So when you look at these markets, you're going to have multiple markets for any given timber tract. All right. So here is a chart that I borrowed from. Here's a resource some of y'all might want to look at. Forest 2 Market. So Forest, the number 2, and then market.com. They have a blog that has a lot of great information, Southwide information on it, and very useful. So this shows a chart. If you look here at the left, this is the stumpage price. Stumpage is the price that the landowner will get for the standing trees, wood on the stump. And then on the right here, you see the chart is Southern Yellow Pine, SYP, Southern Yellow Pine timber price. You see it's not quite as high as that market price. We're in a little more of a specific market here, but you see a general upward trend in the Southern Yellow Pine. But of course you do see this recent spike that's going on. And however, unfortunately, the stumpage price is kind of holding level, and it has been since 2010, it looks like. So again, your little small ups and downs, but overall kind of flat. And I'll give you some of the reasoning for that later on. So here's another thing that helps, I guess, keep wood flat, is imports. So we don't grow and produce nearly the amount of wood that we use. And so you see that, and this is starting in 2008 up to 2021. And you see this recent thing, the price has gone up. And so particularly Canada, last year, it looks like brought in $1.1 billion worth of material, softwood from Canada. So, but I don't want to be all doom and gloom. So there is some good news for us here in the South. So you're looking at, this is North American production, so broken down by region. And so the US South is here on the bottom, this dark green. And you can see that, in fact, we started in 2008 with just under 20 billion board feet. And now we're a little over 20, say 23, 24 billion. So we're actually increasing. Western Canada is getting clobbered. Out west in general is getting clobbered a bit. So so production's moving here, and we will see that later on too in the companies that are coming to town. So this is pulpwood capacity. So I know prices aren't doing like they are in saw timber, but I thought I'd throw this in as well. You see that in the last 12 years, overall pulpwood capacity has declined quite a bit as we're not using so much paper and things like that. However, you see the South has been a little more stable than the overall market. And then to not leave out hardwood, I know this is all talking about pine, but looking at lumber trends for hardwood, again, I don't have the data that goes way back, but again, you see it fairly stable. And then here in this last quarter, 2 quarters, the prices have really started to elevate. And of course, we won't get into inflation and all that good stuff, but see most of all the species are going up. There's a few. Basswood apparently is not in any kind of market that folks want so much of it. All right. So again, I was talking about the West. So out west from the 90s, production has decreased nationwide. National production from 62% of total to less than half. A lot of that, the public lands came off limits in the West, and some of the mills retooled for smaller diameter stuff, but still haven't really gotten up to a good production. And so then after 2008, 30 mills shut down in the West, and taking their overall production from 13 billion board feet in 2005 down to less than 8 by 2009. So, and then it says the number of U.S. mills has declined by 17% since 2010. Now, the number of mills is tricky because, as a lot of you know, the new mills that are coming online, one new mill can displace about 15 older mills. So, number of mills is not significant in the grand scheme of board foot production, but it is significant again when that mill is next to your house versus when that mill is 200 miles away from where you are. It does impact you. All right, and so this is what we see too. That the price of homes, increasing $36,000 of that home because of lumber prices. That's pretty significant. Of course, what the price of a home is, if your home is $350,000, that's only 10%, right? So, but only 10% is still significant. So here, let's get down to Virginia. So, coming from the West, I know those of y'all on Northern Neck are familiar with this company. So Teal Jones has bought a couple of mills in Virginia, but laid off some of their workers in Canada. So things are moving. You look at also other companies that have come down in North Carolina. We have Domtar, which is a Canadian company. We have West Fraser, which is a Canadian company, and there are others in the region. So Canada is moving to town. Of course, we've seen that before in West Point, right? They moved in and moved out, but these companies are buying and selling, and they're looking to, where the wood is available. So that's an important thing for us, is we need to keep some wood available. So looking at this as a graph, the good news again for us is that in 2020, the South-wide, we have seen a 1.4 billion board foot increase. And you see the green dots here are new facilities. So we don't have any new facilities yet in Virginia. We need to get our government folks and economic development folks to work on that. But we do have, again, the 2 mills that Teal Jones bought do have a capacity increase. And anecdotally, I've heard from several other mills around that there's some plans in the works for increase. You don't want to use a short-term price spike though to plan your increase, and then prices go back into the drain, and you have to pay for all that equipment. So you have to be smart as a business on how you're increasing. Another good piece of news for Virginia, again, maybe not for some of us here in the East, but in the South Side, Central Virginia, you see all the small dots up there. There's a lot of mills, and where you have multiple mills, you have competition. And as a landowner, where you have competition for you have multiple bids on your tract, obviously you can get a better price as a landowner. So that's good news on that front. So this is just, you see where the trees grow, and South is obviously significant acreage wise in growing trees. Plus we grow them a lot quicker than Canada does. So this is another little funny meme. So it's what $800 bought you in 2018 versus now. I don't think that's actual data, but still funny. And here's another one. All these people boarding up their beach homes, I think in the next hurricane will just replace the windows. So some of you may have noticed this too. Get back, I had some good news and now some less good news. So looking at the supply issue on the timber side, Wall Street Journal put this article out in 2018, so well before the pandemic. It's too much pine and not enough sawmills. So that's the bottom line for that. And I get a little bit of data here. This is South Carolina data, and you see again things somewhat flat. Mixed hardwoods came down significantly. You think about from almost from $27. Let's see what's the measurement. This is per ton. So from $27 a ton in the first quarter of 2020 to just under 20 bucks. So it dropped $8 a ton. That's pretty significant. It's headed back up, but hardwoods has a lot of different market factors than that. So this is some positive. This is from Timber Mart South, showing that average Southwide, the average pine, saw timber, and chip and saw price is up about $2 a ton. So from the third quarter, and that's the largest 6-month increase in more than a decade. So we'll just be thankful for the short period of time that things are increasing, but then keeping in mind, these are now finally got some Virginia data here. Virginia average prices, and this is from 2011 to 2021. And you see, chip and saw timber, mostly flat or even down. Pine saw timber is even down over a 10-year span. Hardwoods has actually experienced a little bit of an increase, I think due to some export markets. In the pulpwood, again, fairly flat. So, one short piece of the reasoning is if you look at trees that were planting efforts, after World War II, there was a pretty big planting effort. There's not too many of those trees. And when we talk about planting, we're primarily talking about planting pine trees. Not too many hardwoods get planted. And the ones that get planted are more for stream restoration and that kind of thing, and not for wood production. So hardwoods will generate themselves. But you see here, starting, in the 60s, this blue forest industry, which is now not technically forest industry, but there's still investment forestry lands, planted a good amount of trees. And then you see this green couple spikes are correlated with some government programs. So this one, I think, was Soil Bank. And then in the mid 80s, you had some of the NRCS programs that were shifting some acres out of agriculture, hopefully some marginal acres, but anyway. And so we had a lot of trees go in the ground there in the mid 80s, and that's what we're seeing now, this wall of wood, they call it, coming to bear. Now, this is Virginia data. I don't have it up to current, but just draw these lines straight out. You see that hardwood, since the 40s, we have more than doubled our hardwood. Well, maybe right at doubled our hardwood volume statewide. Softwood volumes about the same. We're using the softwoods that we plant. Hardwoods, they're staying on the acres a little longer. So why is it capped off or slowed? Well, you run out of acres. Those of y'all in agriculture know that there's only so many acres, and that's your fixed thing. So I find it funny that you see in the news different politicians and your Jeff Bezoses and Elon Musk's and all, they want to plant 1 trillion trees and things like that. And well, you need a place to plant them. And so that's one thing for Virginia that we're kind of running out of, is places to plant. So you see here, this is, again, the volumes mostly hardwood. The only shift is there's been some shift in the 40s. It's mostly natural pine. And now we see some plantation pine come in. But again, that's fairly small in the grand scheme of things. And for those of y'all who are in the eastern part of the state, I know, I think the whole world is pine, but statewide, we do have a lot of hardwood. And the other thing, I know this slide's a little fuzzy and it's in another language, but we're in the global world now. So United States is right here. We can grow 10 cubic meters per year, but you look down in Brazil and some of these other countries, they can grow trees at about 3 times the rate that we can grow trees. So we got competition as well. So the other thing that's keeping prices, so what's keeping prices of timber low, if you will, or keeping them from following the lumber prices? You look at the way lumber production is, the way timber is harvested now. If any of y'all live in these areas, you wake up on a Saturday morning and you hear that thing that sounds like a big mosquito down the road. You got these saw head cutters and they can really work through the wood. If you notice a logging job going in on Monday and then you come by on Friday and there's 100 acres gone that used to be there, the machinery has definitely increased production. We have bigger skidders now that can go on land with bigger tires. We use mats. So the wet weather effect that used to be more severe, and it still is a factor, but that wet weather effect is not nearly as severe as it once was. And I know in these last few have been some of the wettest years that I've seen, and some of the mills around here have still been on quota. So that's it's just like I said, crazy the way how much wood that loggers can get out when things are right. And then some of these mills, the pulp mills for sure, and some of the larger sawmills have installed some wet yards, so they have the ability to carry and store, if you will, a little more inventory. So that also, keeps that whole factor of, we're out of wood, we need to pay top dollar price. So that's not great for the landowner, but that's only one reason the prices are also stable, if you will. So what bottlenecks are causing these price things? Labor is the primary one that we've talked about, and truck drivers. So just some anecdotal evidence. Been to some of these sawmills, and one would think with the prices way up they would add second, third shift, but you need people to be able to work that second and third shift. And then even at that, you produce lumber flat out, but if you don't have anyone to truck and haul that lumber out of your mill to the distribution centers, to the retail, then you're still stuck. So truck drivers are severe. In the woods, production is very mechanized. Again, like I said, a few people can bring a lot of tons of wood to the mill. Truck drivers are still a part of the bottleneck there, but the truck driver pool that loggers pull from is a little bit different than the truck driver pool that the mills utilize. So again, not trying to get political, whether you read Fox or whether you read CNN, both agree that truckers are in a shortage. So so as a Virginia landowner, what do I do? My recommendation to a lot is just stay the course. If you know, one thing is pay attention, get educated. Look at those sources that I mentioned earlier, as far as the region-wide sources, but more so, consider what your local markets are, and part of that is speaking with a local forester about your objectives. I know back in the 80s, we were plant pine, and you saw that the pine prices are flat and the hardwood prices are up a little bit. I don't know that you want to shift all the way to hardwoods, but, over your particular property, you have to look at what objectives you have. And then you're also projecting out 17 to 20 years for pine, and that's if you're looking at pulpwood. And hardwood, saw timber, you're looking at 50 years out. So it's hard to predict what's going to go on 50 years from now. But the best thing to do is to manage the acres you have with the future in mind. So I say that, and I'll put in a little plug. One thing that we offer throughout the year is some legacy planning workshops. We call it Generation Next, I think is the name we're putting on it. Looking at how you may pass your land investment and timber investment to your next generation, and do that without losing a lot of ground. And then the other thing is to look into something like the Virginia Forestry Association. So that group works to maintain favorable conditions, to attract new markets and to keep the markets we have here. They're not, of course, doing it single-handedly, but that is a good advocacy organization, because really the markets that are here is what's going to impact our price. As a landowner in Eastern Virginia, again, you're not going to be able to sell your wood on the quote unquote open market to Chicago Board of Trade or anything. So we need to have mills and markets here in the state. And long term, there's a lot of population, so keep adding people, and the people that are there keep using more resource. And we only have so many acres, so we need to use them wisely. And with that, I will turn this off and maybe take some questions and use whatever remaining time we have for some Q&A. Do we have any questions?
All right, thanks, Neil. We appreciate you being here this morning. I just was checking. I don't see any questions in the chat window at the time, Neil. If anybody's on and has a question, please feel free to click the unmute button there in the bottom left-hand corner and ask questions for Neil. That's really the purpose of these meetings bi-weekly, is to give people an opportunity to ask questions, get information on current topics. So if you have questions, now's the time to ask those. Got a great mind to get a response from.
I don't know about a great mind, but one thing I didn't mention in the talk, again, it makes me nervous sometimes putting a lot of this stuff on online in perpetuity for everybody to go back and second guess on. But when it comes to markets, but one thing we did see, unfortunately not directly in Virginia, but very near Virginia, we did have a sawmill begin to start in Enfield, North Carolina, which is just slightly south of Emporia. And this was going to be a very large sawmill. And I think it was banking on China's growth there. It was owned by an Austrian company, I think. And of course, China didn't do what they thought they were going to do. And so that project has never really taken off, but there's hardware sitting on the ground that really somebody just needs to flip the switch on. It's been bought and sold again, I think. So, I mean, a matter of time, again, somebody could flip the switch and turn a lot of production on. Again, if the market is ready for that. Likewise, a significant acreage, I was talking about the Canadians coming to town, but significant acreage of land that used to be primarily international paper land down here in the Southeast has been purchased in the last 5 years by a Western US forest products company called Roseburg. And out west, they have a lot of mills that produce laminated materials, engineered wood products, things like that. again, I don't want to make any speculation, make anybody buy any stock or anything like that, but to have that much acreage and have the know-how within the company to do some value added. Plus, we're near the ports. That's the other thing I didn't also mention. We're near the ports there in Norfolk, and also that's also an advantage. And I didn't mention wood pellets. So we do have a export wood pellet market that's here in the Southeast. Again, not a high value product, but every dollar that a landowner can get off of their property adds to the overall value. So the port really helps us as well.
Neil, I saw Watson might have a question. I think he's on the call with us. So Watson, go ahead.
Thanks, Robbie. Great job, Neil. Very interesting. I wanted to ask about the status of the southern pine beetle. That was a pretty devastating pest. I don't hear as much about it now. Can you sort of give us an update on how that problem is being addressed now? Or are we just doing a better job of managing our timber? Because I just don't hear a lot of problems anymore about it.
So certainly. So yeah, what Watson's referring to, those of y'all who are around long enough there in the late 1980s, early 1990s, we had the southern pine beetle that decimated, I would say 25-30% of the pine in the Southeast got killed by the southern pine beetle. That issue, there's actually a mountain pine beetle. So one other thing that is creating this Canada thing is they've had what's a mountain pine beetle issue in British Columbia that's probably killed half of their trees. So that's another reason the mills can't function so well out there, is they're in a little bit of a glut of material. But for southern pine beetle, a lot of those trees in the 80s and all were planted by seed, with helicopters and things like that, planted by seed. They were way too thick. We had, of course, in the 80s, we had the big drought that everybody remembers, 1980. And trees were way too thick, and there was a kind of a backlog of thinning them. So two things that have happened since then is, for one, as long as we have good pulp markets around, and we have crews that will do thinning, that helps by thinning those pines. That helps each of those pines be more, have enough reserves and sap reserves and things like that to naturally fend off the pine beetle. So where we do see some pine beetle spots still are in areas where, say, they're on an urban fringe or something, and those pines aren't being thinned because the markets are not near. So we do see that some. Department of Forestry, Virginia Department of Forestry does have some funding for small pine areas to help loggers get in there and do some thinning. It kind of goes to helping loggers, but it will help your area. There's also some population dynamics with the bug itself, but I want to say overall. And then the other thing is we're planting, we're planting those pines now as seedlings and not as seed. And so we're not, we're planting maybe 484, 400, 500 trees per acre, and not multiple thousand trees per acre. And so people are doing pre-commercial thinning and things like that too to help reduce pine beetle incidents. I see another question on here too, it looks like, from Bill Latane. How do you find a logger qualified to do a good job of hardwood select cutting in Eastern Virginia? Good question, Bill. Yes, this is the frustrating thing, whether it be select cutting, whether it be small tracts. Much like the sawmill business, where all equipment's getting bigger and all mills are getting bigger, in the woods and in farm fields, all this equipment is getting bigger and more expensive. So that means costs money to move, it costs money to operate once you get it there. So in the eastern part of the state, a lot of the logging contractors, instead of going, there's it's not that much value in an individual tree, so they're having to cut a lot of small trees, right? You get to the western part of the state where you're still cutting large oak trees with a chainsaw. Each individual tree has more value, and so you can do that select cut better there. One thing is just talk to your local foresters. There are a few smaller loggers that chose not to go the path of making big equipment payments. And there may be a few. The challenge is there are only a few, and so they can only cut so many acres. And so there's a lot more jobs to be had, a lot more people that are looking for people to do what you call that select cut. Because you get in there with that big equipment trying to select certain trees, and of course just the weight of the equipment, plus you're throwing the trees around, it's very hard to do that delicately and not scar up what you're trying to leave. So I don't know, Bill, you can let me know in the text or wherever if that answered your question. But talk to your local, say, Department of Forestry. I'd start there. They actually have a list online, more of consultant foresters. I don't know if they have loggers per se, but if you talk to your local Department of Forestry forester, they may know of some local crews. Anybody else?
Neil, one of the things that you mentioned, and just really brief for folks who maybe they're on the call that don't have the background, could you just talk a little bit about some of the different harvesting options or stages? I know you mentioned like chip and saw, pulpwood, that type of thing. And maybe if landowners are in a situation and say a pine stand, do they consider maybe harvesting early, for pulpwood, or do they take it to, to the maturity, those type of considerations?
Sure. There used to be, and I may, still be able to find, if you want to send me an email, a piece of software. Essentially, it's just a spreadsheet where you could put in the price for each product, put in the age and that kind of thing. Because, if you know how fast your pine trees are growing, and it would kind of give you the optimum time to do, say, a first thinning, second thinning. And so it used to be back in the I say late 80s, early 90s, when you had a plethora of markets to choose from, unlimited markets, we'll say, a certain time when you plant the tree, and at year 15 to 20, depending on how fast your trees are growing, you could do a first thinning, be a commercial thinning, but you wouldn't get a lot of money, but you get some return on it. And then usually around age 25 or something, about 10 years later, you could get a second thinning. And then at age, say, 40, you'd have a saw timber. And at that time, saw timber had to be 12 or 14 inches, a saw timber tree. And that was your optimal harvest regime for money. Things have changed. And that's the thing, the saw with the saw timber market kind of going flat and having more, now you saw the pulp capacity reducing over the nation, but around here in Eastern Virginia, thankfully, the pulp capacity has maintained pretty well. Had a little glitch when International Paper shut down in the in the mid 2000s. Opened back up, I think around 2012, something like that. Had a little glitch there, but right now, Franklin's using a lot of wood. West Point's using a fair amount of wood still. And so, those big pulp mills are using, and we have also down here, again, the pellet mill I spoke of. And in the Piedmont of the state, you have a lot of chip mills. So they're making OSB, oriented strand board, sheeting for houses there. So the price for small trees essentially has increased a bit, and the price for medium size and large size trees has not increased that much. So you have more people going to just a short rotation, basically a say a 20-year rotation of just plant and cut, plant and cut. They say down in South Carolina, plant them thick and grow them quick. And, you know, the turnaround, you look at the time value of money as well. You know, the longer, if you spend $1 to plant a tree, and if you have to wait 40 years to get that dollar back, it's not worth as much. Whereas if you only have to wait 20 years to get that dollar back, you're gaining quite a bit there. And that's discounting any other value you might have from the property, like aesthetic value if you live there, or hunting, you know, if you're hunting that property. 20-year-old trees are pretty thick and hard to do a lot of hunting through. Whereas if you have some thin pine, so for that 20 to 40 year time period, you can definitely see through them and use them for other purposes. So I don't know if that answered your question, but has been a shift from going to that 3 harvests over 40 years to almost a clear cut every 20. So a pine tree is very much like corn or wheat at that point.
Thank you, Neil. You opened me up for my next step and my next question. I invited 2 of our local resources. We have Jesse Bander, which is our local forester, and then Kelsey Williams, who works for the Soil and Water Conservation District. And both of them have resources for our timber or landowners. Can we start with Jesse, please? And Jesse, did you hear any questions that you can address locally?
Yeah, hi Laura, thanks. I have been taking some notes and I just wanted to follow up on a few things. We actually just finished trapping for the southern pine beetle, monitoring populations this year. You know, very low chance of an outbreak, at least in the eastern part of the state. I guess I should start off by saying I'm a forester primarily in Hanover County, but kind of the counties north and east of Richmond. So most of my data and information is things happening east of 95 and north of the James, but very low chance of a southern pine beetle outbreak this year. And I think Neil had mentioned there is some cost share available. If you have a overstocked stand, as long as it meets certain parameters, there's a cost share to help cover the cost of pre-commercial thinning. And then also there is a logger cost share to help entice loggers to come into some of these smaller pine stands and thin them. So I want to touch on that for southern pine beetle. And Bill, you'd asked about finding a logger to do good hardwood select cutting in Eastern Virginia. That certainly can be a challenge. One thing I want to just kind of echo what Neil said to everyone, you know, if you're unsure about selling some timber, you haven't done it before, probably your best step would be contact your local Virginia Department of Forestry forester. We have a brand new website, dof.virginia.gov. There's a search feature you can put in your county, and it will give you a couple points of contact for local DOF foresters. And, you know, we're public service, so we come out free of charge and kind of start helping you evaluate your timber. You know, we can't give you a price, but tell you what we think as far as what sort of management or cutting should occur. And then we can also provide you contact lists with consulting foresters, sometimes specialized jobs. You know, you might want like a small lot logger or something like that. We have those contact lists. So your local state Virginia Department of Forestry forester is always a good place to start. And on that note, you know, pretty much since the 60s, the department's been very focused on pine management. Most of our cost share programs, like the reforestation of timberlands, all geared towards pine management. That's a cost share to help cover costs of replanting once you've done a clear cut, and also spraying herbicide treatments. But the big push right now by Rob Farrell, our state forester, is hardwood management. They've been developing a hardwood management tool, and there's going to be some cost share coming out soon. We're not exactly sure what exactly that looks like, or what, you know, exactly it's going to cover, but they have identified some money to start doing some more hardwood management. And I think part of that program is going to be identifying and training some contractors to do better hardwood management, because there really are not many logging contractors in Eastern Virginia who have the either skill or desire to do effective kind of hardwood thinnings or timber stand improvement cuts. So that should be coming down the pipeline, relatively soon, I think within the next year or so. But other than that, I think I mentioned cost share for southern pine beetle programs. There's cost share for reforestation and timberland. We can also assist with burning. Sometimes some of the federal projects like EQIP programs, things like that, to establish pine savannas, we can help with some of those things. So there's more information on our website. Like I said, it's brand new. It's no longer an embarrassment. I'm happy to send people to the DOF website. A lot of information on there. Probably the biggest thing though is you can easily find out how to contact your local DOF rep and get started from there. And if there's any other questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'll mute myself here.
Thank you, Jesse. And Kelsey, did you have any cost share opportunities available for landowners?
Yeah, good morning. So I'm Kelsey Williams. I'm a conservation specialist at the Hanover Caroline Soil and Water Conservation District. And we've got a couple practices through our cost share program for forestry practices. We've got our FR1, which is afforestation of crop, hay, and pasture land. And that incentivizes planting trees on land that is currently in crop or pasture to make a permanent conversion to forest. And that has a cost share incentive of 75%, and it also has a per acre incentive. We've also got FR3, which is woodland buffer filter area, to create a woodland buffer filter to protect waterways and water bodies by reducing erosion. That cost share is 95%, so that's pretty high, and it has a per acre incentive. So if that were a practice anyone was interested in, you could get 100% likely. I'm sorry, my dog is currently squeaking her squeaky toy. But the buffer filter area, you could get over 100% of your cost share with a minimum of 35 feet of buffer and a maximum of 100 feet. We've also got FR4, which is woodland erosion stabilization. And this is a little bit different than the others. This is to promote land shaping and planting of permanent vegetation on eroding areas on forest harvesting sites. So typically all of our practices are ag-based, crops, pastures. So this is a little bit different, but it also has a 75% cost share. And we also have one more, a continuing conservation initiative for forested riparian buffer maintenance. So that is once you've implemented a riparian buffer, a forested riparian buffer, and it is out of its lifespan, that's an incentive to keep it going past that lifespan. And I know that's a lot of information. It's pretty technical, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to us at our website, at our office, stop on by. And our cost share year starts July 1. Our sign up starts July 12th, and we've got our biggest year ever coming up. So we've got a lot of opportunity to cost share and work with the folks in the counties. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Robbie, you want to close us up?
He either can't find his mute button or we lost Rob.
Hey, sorry about that, guys. I'm back with you. I was talking. Neil's right. I had pressed the mute button. So thank you to everyone for being here this morning. Neil, he's added a lot of great links in the chat window for those of you that haven't had a chance to see that. He's added the Department of Forestry link there, DCR, as well as Soil and Water Conservation District. So a lot of the information that was just shared by the forester and the folks from the local Soil and Water District, you can find additional stuff there on those links from Neil. So again, thank you, Neil. Appreciate you being with us this morning. A pleasure as always. It has been recorded. So if you have folks that you work with in your localities, please share this. We'll get the link out to everybody. Hopefully it'll be a great resource for people that may have this very same question that Neil addressed this morning, or just general questions about forestry management. With that being said, just want to bring everybody's attention to a few things. The slides have been scrolling through there on the screen throughout some of the question and answer. The first thing is our next presentation will be July the 1st, which I believe is 2 weeks from today, Thursday, July the 1st. And we're going to have some specialists from Extension and Virginia Tech talk about cucurbit management. So any vegetable producers that may be out there, both commercially and backyard vegetable producers, they're going to share some information on cucurbit management and an update on that. Also, as always, just like to thank the group of agents and summer interns and Extension that make the effort possible. First of all, our guest speakers, as always, and then the agents that make it possible, Stephanie Romelchek, Laura Maxine, Trent Jones, and Frank Long, as well as our 2 summer interns in Hanover and Westmoreland, Claire Talamy and Sarah Hallam. So thank you both, and thank you to all the agents for your efforts for this. One last comment I'll make for those that are still on the line. If you visit the evaluation link there, or if you're watching this recording, if you please go to that link. It takes about 30 seconds of your time just to provide us with some feedback. And also an opportunity, if you have something of interest, drop us a line and let us know that. We'll be happy to try to get some speakers and get an update on the topic. So again, appreciate everybody joining us this morning. Thank you again, Neil, as always. Appreciate your time. And like I said, the recording will be available. So hope everyone has a great rest of their day.